I waited an hour. You said you'd be here. You promised me a chance. You lie. Her voice cracked like dry wood under an axe, thin and reedy, trying to be a shout, but dissolving into a desperate, wretched plea that was swallowed by the cavernous, glittering echoes of the Pantheon restaurant. She stood frozen in the middle of the lobby, the cold marble floor sucking the warmth from her cheap, carefully chosen heels. Her hands clenched around the strap of her thrifted clutch, knuckles white against the faded gold trim. Her blind date, a man named Bartholomew, a name that now tasted like ash in her mouth, was already a block away, his expensive, custom-tailored suit a receding, dark blur as he hailed a taxi without a backward glance. He had been there exactly 22 minutes. 22 minutes of sipping water. 22 minutes of barely concealed scorn and judgment. 22 minutes of a quiet, brutal interrogation designed to expose her poverty like a contagious disease. Then, a quick, dismissive apology. Family emergency. I'll call you. He hadn't even bothered to pay for the still untouched glass of wine the waiter had set down. He had simply walked away, leaving her sitting alone at the most prominent, most expensive corner table in the entire restaurant, the white linen of the tablecloth suddenly feeling like a flag of her surrender, a stark announcement of her utter, complete failure. The maître d', a man whose face was a perpetual sculpture of bored disdain, glided over, his shadow falling across her like a shroud. "Miss Hale," he murmured, his voice a low, silken sneer, "your guest appears to have departed. You will need to settle the tab for the open wine, or we will be forced to call security." Security. The word dropped into the silence like a stone into a deep well, sending ripples of shame out across the polished floor. It was the absolute, final, excruciating layer of humiliation. To be abandoned was one thing, but to be threatened with security in a place this opulent, this ridiculously out of her league, was a public execution. The eyes of the surrounding diners, old money, new money, power brokers and their impeccably dressed satellites, felt like physical beams, scorching her skin, judging her cheap dress, the slight fray at the hem, the anxiety tightening her features. Bartholomew hadn't even paid for the wine, a single glass of house white that cost more than she earned in 3 hours cleaning offices. The $20 in her wallet was supposed to be for bus fare and a loaf of bread. She couldn't spare a cent. The rent was already 2 weeks late. The eviction notice taped to her door felt colder than the air conditioning in this restaurant. "Be strong, Ella. Don't cry. Don't give them the satisfaction." She fumbled with her purse, her fingers trembling so badly she nearly dropped the cheap leather. I only have cash," she whispered, her throat dry. "I can't afford the wine right now. I was waiting for my date," he said. "It matters little what he said, Miss Hale," the maître d' interrupted smoothly, his tone chillingly polite, yet utterly ruthless. "The bill is $45. We operate on a strict policy. Perhaps you should stick to the local diners, where your circumstances are less likely to cause a scene." The sheer, unadulterated cruelty of the remark was a physical blow. Her vision swam. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the deliberate crushing of her last shred of dignity. Circumstances. Yes. Her circumstances were poverty. Her circumstances were a life where every door slammed shut in her face. Her circumstances were a tiny, moldy apartment, where she slept on the floor so her grandmother, weakened by illness and the constant stress of their debt, could have the bed. Her circumstances were why she had even agreed to this ridiculous, soul-crushing blind date with Bartholomew, a man introduced by a well-meaning but utterly clueless coworker, under the false pretense of networking. He'd promised to introduce her to people who could fund her grandmother's desperately needed medical treatments. He'd promised hope. He'd delivered only public, searing shame, tears, hot and unstoppable, finally spilled over, trailing mascara down her cheeks. She dug deeper into the clutch, finding the crumpled $10 bill and the 5 ones, $15. She could beg him for a payment plan, a partial payment, anything to avoid the humiliation of being physically dragged out. "Please," she choked out, holding the meager bills toward the maître d'. "It's all I have until my next shift. I'll come back tomorrow. I swear I will. I'll pay the rest. Just please, don't call them." The maitre d' looked down at the bills, then back at her face, and his lip curled in an expression of pure, refined disgust. He didn't even touch the money. He just slowly reached toward the discreet phone tucked beneath the reservation podium. The moment stretched into an eternity, a slow-motion catastrophe where Ella could hear the blood pounding in her ears, anticipating the screech of a siren, the rough grip of security on her arm. This would be the end. A permanent stain on her record, a public disgrace that would follow her, making it impossible to get even the lowliest cleaning job again. Grandma. What will Grandma do? The thought was a sharp, physical pain that doubled her over slightly. Then, a sudden sharp sound, not the expected ring of the phone, but the heavy, deliberate placement of a glass tumbler back onto polished wood. The sound cut through the murmurs, and the maitre d's cold breathing like a gunshot. From a shadowed, deeply recessed booth that commanded a view of the entire room, a voice spoke. It was a voice that didn't need to be loud to be heard. It was a low baritone, like the rumble of distant thunder, quiet yet vibrating with an absolute, unquestionable authority that made the air itself feel thinner, harder to breathe. "The lady," the voice said, the words measured, deliberate, and perfectly clear, "is with me." Alara froze, her head snapping up. She didn't dare turn around, but the attention of every single person in the room instantly shifted away from her and toward the source of the voice. The maitre d's hand stopped inches from the phone. His face, moments ago so smugly superior, suddenly draining of all color, leaving him looking like an expensive, terrified ghost. "She's with me," the voice repeated, even lower this time, but with a dangerous, razor-sharp edge that implied no challenge would be tolerated. "And her tab is now mine." A heavy, folded square of white linen napkin, not one from the table, but one apparently carried by the speaker, drifted down onto the reservation podium, settling next to Ella's crumpled dollar bills. On the napkin lay a single, impossibly thick black credit card. It wasn't gold or platinum or even the familiar black of an American Express Centurion. It was a solid, matte black, devoid of logos or identifying text, except for a single small, almost invisible silver engraving. The maitre didn't touch it. He just stared at the card, and then, slowly, meticulously, he raised his head, his eyes meeting the dark corner booth. The silence in the restaurant was so profound now, you could hear the distant clink of silverware from the kitchen. Ella finally dared to turn, her heart hammering against her ribs so fiercely it felt like it might fracture bone. The man in the booth was a silhouette against the subdued, luxurious lighting, yet his presence dominated the vast space. He was dressed in a suit that somehow made Bartholomew's look like a rented costume, a dark, perfectly tailored masterpiece that hugged wide shoulders and a lean, powerful frame. His face was in shadow, but the sharp, clean lines of his jaw, the hard set of his mouth, and the glint of his eyes that felt like they were seeing into her very soul, were impossible to ignore. He was young, perhaps early 30s, but the stillness and control in his posture spoke of an age-old, dangerous power. He wasn't a patron, he was a sovereign. In his arms, bundled against his chest and cradled under his chin, was the source of his current preoccupation. A small child, a little girl, perhaps no more than a year old, wearing a tiny, ridiculously expensive pink dress, fast asleep. Her face was tucked into the crook of his neck, one tiny hand curled around his perfectly knotted silk tie. The sheer, breathtaking contrast of the man's lethal intensity and the profound, vulnerable innocence of the sleeping child was a paradox that slammed into Ella's mind. The Mafia boss, Valentino Val Rossi. The name flashed into her mind, a whispered, fearful legend in the city. He wasn't just new money. He was the shadow beneath the city's veneer of civilization, the absolute power that orchestrated the movements of money, people, and sometimes life and death. He was beautiful in a way that was terrifying, cold, sculptural, and utterly devoid of softness. He met the maitre d's terrified gaze, then shifted his eyes, fixing them on Ella. His expression was impossible to read, neither kind nor cruel, just utterly, fiercely observant. "Run the card," Valentino ordered, his voice still low, now laced with an unmistakable thread of impatience, and you will find the cost of her glass of wine to be of no consequence." He then tilted his head, his gaze sweeping over Ella's tear-stained face, her cheap clothes, and the pitiful crumpled cash she still held. "Go to her," he instructed his personal attendant, a hulking man in an equally immaculate suit, who was standing rigidly by the booth. "Retrieve the lady and her belongings. Tell her I require a moment of her company." The attendant moved like a ghost, silent and swift. The maître d'armes, meanwhile, was moving as if electrified, snatching up the black card with trembling hands. His previous hauteur evaporated into pure, cold fear. He practically threw himself over the machine, desperate to finish the transaction and remove the object of the Mafia boss's displeasure and the card that carried his terrifying signature from his sight. Ella, too shocked to move, simply watched the attendant approach her. He didn't speak. He simply extended a massive, perfectly manicured hand toward her elbow, a silent, non-negotiable command. She had no choice. She was no longer humiliated, she was claimed, and the weight of that claim felt heavier than a mountain. "He has a baby," the thought was the only anchor in the storm of her fear. A beautiful, vulnerable baby girl, sleeping in the arms of a predator. "Who is she?" The attendant guided her not to the booth, but to a separate, smaller, exquisitely private drawing room near the back, traditionally reserved for high-stakes business dealings or political discreetness. He opened the heavy mahogany door, ushered her in, and closed it with a solid thud that cut off the noise of the main dining room, leaving her in a velvet-lined silence. A moment later, the door reopened. Valentino Valrosi walked in, carrying the sleeping baby, as if she were made of fragile Venetian glass. He didn't look at Ella. He walked to a long, plush sofa, gently sat down, and shifted the baby onto his chest, holding her with one possessive, careful arm, while the other rested on the back of the sofa. He seemed to be waiting for her to speak, or perhaps, simply waiting for her to be still. Alara remained standing, frozen in the center of the room, her gaze fixed on the little girl. The child's soft, regular breathing was the only sound in the room. "Valentino Rossi," he finally said, his voice a low, neutral declaration, not an introduction, but a statement of identity, a warning, and a challenge, all in one. "You are Alara Hale." He didn't ask, he stated her name as a cold, undeniable fact he already knew. "Ella," she corrected automatically, then immediately regretted the audacity of correcting a man who could likely have her entire life dissolved with a snap of his fingers. "Yes, sir." He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit." She sat immediately, on the very edge of the velvet seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her mind was racing, trying to put the pieces together. The name Valentino Rossi was associated with organized crime, with impenetrable wealth, with violence, but never, ever with a baby. He was an enigma. "Why?" she asked, the single word trembling. "Why did you say I was with you?" He looked at her then. Truly looked at her. His dark eyes like polished obsidian, devoid of warmth, but intensely focused. "Because that man was garbage," he said simply, dismissively. "And his treatment of you was a public display of disrespect, which I find intolerable in my establishment." His establishment. Not a restaurant. His. Of course, everything in this city was, in some way, his. "I didn't ask for your help," she whispered, her pride, meager as it was, flaring weakly. "I can handle my own problems." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth, a gesture that was more dangerous than any frown. "You are about to be escorted out by armed men for $45, Alara. That is not handling your problems, that is collapsing beneath them. I dislike watching weakness, unless it is mine to command." The raw arrogance of the statement should have repelled her, but there was a strange, undeniable truth in it. She had been collapsing. "I don't need your charity," she insisted, trying to regain some footing. "I will pay you back. The $45. He let out a low, almost silent breath of amusement. "Keep your money, Tesoro. You look like you need it more than I do." The endearment, "Tesoro, treasure," spoken in his deep, Italian-accented voice, was an alarming jolt. It felt intimate, yet possessive, a word a man might use for a beloved object. He shifted, adjusting the baby, who let out a tiny soft sigh. He looked down at the child, and in that fleeting, unguarded moment, the ruthless armor of Valentino Rossi cracked. His expression softened, his mouth lost its hard edge, and his eyes, those terrifying eyes, filled with a tenderness so profound it was almost painful to witness. This was the opening. This was the key. "This is Valentina," he murmured, his gaze still on the baby. "She is everything." "She's beautiful," Ella said, the words coming out genuine and warm. She had an instinctive, deep love for all things fragile and overlooked, and this tiny life clutched by this immense, dangerous man resonated with her own need to protect. "She is unwell," Valentino stated, the simple fact carrying the weight of the world's despair. He finally lifted his eyes back to Ella. "She needs specialized care. Private, constant, dedicated. Her mother is not a factor. My staff are discreet, but they are not dedicated." The implication hung heavy in the air. He wasn't simply a man who rescued distressed women, he was a man who saw an opportunity. He saw her desperation, her obvious poverty, and her evident compassion. The very compassion she had just tried to use to beg the maitre d' for a chance. He saw a soul desperate enough to take a terrifying job. "I don't understand," Ella said, though her heart was already beginning to pound with a terrifying hope. "Are you offering me a job?" "I am offering you a life," he corrected, his voice hardening, returning to its commanding tone. "I watched you, Alara. You stood your ground. You were humiliated, you were threatened, but you were ready to fight for your dignity and your grandmother's survival. You have fire. More importantly, you have clean hands and a kind face. My daughter needs a gentle hand and absolute loyalty. I will give you more money than you have ever seen, enough to pay your rent for the next decade, enough for any doctor your grandmother needs. All you have to do is accept 2 conditions." He leaned forward slightly, and the sheer gravity of his presence made the small room feel suffocating.
1. You are her governess, her caretaker, her shadow. You live in my residence. You do not leave her side without my express permission. You tell no one about this arrangement. Your grandmother is to know only that you have found a benefactor who appreciates your unique talents. He paused, his gaze burning into her. 2. You are to forget the man you were waiting for. Forget this life. From the moment you walk through my doors, you are mine to command, and your past is a ghost I have already buried. You belong to the family now, and the family protects its own.
But it also owns its own. The sheer, staggering magnitude of the offer, the escape, the safety for her grandmother, the end of the bone-deep exhaustion of being perpetually poor, collided violently with the terrifying reality of the terms. She would be an indentured servant to a man whose world was built on shadows and blood. She would be safe, but trapped, owned. Grandma. She saw her grandmother's frail, smiling face in her mind. She saw the tremor in her hands, the constant pain in her eyes. She saw the doctor's prognosis, the expensive medication that was the only lifeline. "What about the danger?" Ella asked, her voice barely a breath. "You're who you are. Will I be safe? Will Valentina be safe?" A cold, grim look settled on his features. "I am the danger, Elara. If you stay close to me, nothing in this city will touch you. My enemies fear me more than they fear God, and those who touch what is mine, especially my daughter, find their lives ending in ways that are unpleasant. Your safety is guaranteed by my power." He held out a hand, a silent, powerful invitation. "Do we have an agreement, Alara Hale? You give me your service and your silence. I give you everything else." This wasn't a choice, it was a destiny. A leap from the frying pan of poverty into the fire of a forbidden, dangerous life. She saw the sleeping, innocent face of Valentina, and the last of her resistance crumbled. Her compassion, her greatest weakness in the world, was now her only currency in his. "I accept," Ella whispered, her voice husky with the enormity of the vow. "I will protect her with my life, Mr. Rossi." "Call me Val," he corrected, his eyes locking with hers in a final, binding look. "And you will not need to give your life. Only your obedience. If you've ever wished someone strong would step in when no one else would, to save you, not just from a moment of crisis, but from a lifetime of crushing struggle, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel, because Ella's rescue is only the beginning of a story where the lines between protector and captor love and danger become fatally blurred. Ella's world became the Rossi estate, a sprawling, walled fortress of white stone and dark secrets nestled on a cliff overlooking the icy blue ocean. It was beautiful and utterly impersonal, a luxurious prison. Her life was now defined by the rhythmic, demanding schedule of Valentina: early morning feedings, quiet playtime in the vast sunlit nursery, meticulous recording of her symptoms and temperature, and the constant, hovering presence of Val's silent security detail. She had settled into a routine quickly, her natural competence and tireless compassion shining through. Valentina, who had been a fussy, irritable baby, seemed to calm instantly in Ella's arms. Ella would sing her old forgotten folk songs her grandmother used to hum, and the baby would listen, eyes wide and trusting, the faint pallor of her illness momentarily forgotten. Val watched. He was omnipresent, yet remote. He would appear in the nursery, at odd hours, 3 in the morning, mid-afternoon, during her quiet nap, or late evening during the specialized breathing treatments. He would stand in the doorway, a dark, imposing figure, simply watching Ella with his daughter. He never spoke much, just a brief, clipped inquiry about Valentina's health, or a silent nod of approval. One evening, a little over 2 weeks into her new life, Ella was rocking Valentina in the glider, humming a lullaby. The baby was restless, struggling with a slight fever. Ella had a cold compress on her forehead, her touch feather-light and focused entirely on soothing the child. Val was standing in his usual spot by the door, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. "You never tire," he stated, his voice a low comment in the quiet room. Ella looked up, startled. "She is in pain, Val. How could I tire?" "The nurse before you complained constantly," he said, taking a slow sip of his drink. "She said the hours were impossible. She treated Valentina like a duty. You treat her like—" He trailed off, searching for the word. "Like a person," Ella finished gently. "Like a little girl who needs comfort. She can feel your anxiety, Val. She needs to feel secure." He stiffened slightly. "I am never anxious. You are for her," Ella countered, daring to challenge him, her courage fueled by the protective heat for Valentina. "I see you. You fear that you cannot keep her safe from this sickness. That is anxiety." The air grew instantly frigid. His eyes narrowed, and the cold mask of the Mafia boss snapped back into place. "You forget your position, Alara." "No, I don't," she responded, her own voice steady. "I know my position is to care for your daughter, and to do that, I must be honest about what she needs. She needs a father who is strong, yes, but also a father who is present and unafraid to show he cares, not just a powerful man who watches from the shadows." He set his glass down on a nearby table, with a loud, deliberate thunk that made Valentina stir. He walked toward her, not quickly, but with a slow, predatory stillness that made every muscle in Ella's body tighten in anticipation. He stopped right beside the glider, looking down at her, his scent expensive cologne, leather and something darkly masculine filling her senses. "You have a reckless mouth for a woman who is entirely at my mercy," he murmured, his face inches from hers. The threat was palpable, a chilling promise of retribution. Ella's breath hitched, but she didn't look away. "Then tell me to leave. I will go, but first, let me give this child her medicine." For a long, agonizing moment, their eyes locked. She saw the dark fury in his, the sheer, unbridled power he was holding back. But then, his gaze dropped to Valentina's face, and the fury seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a weary, almost desperate yearning. He reached out a single large finger, and gently stroked the baby's cheek. "The doctor said it is a chronic respiratory infection," he finally said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It will pass, but slowly, and she will always be vulnerable. Then she will always need people to fight for her," Ella said softly, mirroring his tone. "That's what love is, Vale. Being a constant, gentle shield." His eyes snapped back to hers. "Do not speak to me of love, Elara. It is a weakness I cannot afford." "And yet," Ella countered, gesturing to the child, "she is the strongest evidence you have of it." Vale straightened up, turning his back to her, running a hand through his dark hair, in a rare gesture of frustration. "Give her the medicine. Then you will stay in the nursery tonight. I need—" Silence. It wasn't a request. It was an expulsion. He didn't want her sharp insights, her dangerous observations. He wanted her to simply be the dutiful caretaker. But Ella didn't just give the medicine. She also placed a hand, a small, warm, comforting gesture on his forearm as he stood there, rigid and alone. "You're a good father, Val. Just a scared one." He flinched as if struck. The next moment, he had turned and left the room, the heavy door closing with a solid click that was both a farewell and a warning. The fragile peace of the mansion was shattered 3 weeks later. Ella had been doing her rounds late at night. Valentina had finally dropped into a deep, fever-free sleep. The halls of the estate were always quiet, but tonight, the silence was different. It was heavy, charged and wrong. As she passed the library which Val used as his primary office, she heard voices, not Val's deep baritone, but 2 others, sharp and vicious, speaking rapid-fire Italian. Rivals. Val was meeting with people who clearly had no respect for him, or his territory. She was about to retreat when she heard a sound that froze the blood in her veins, the sharp, metallic snick of a handgun being cocked. "Valentino, you disappoint me," one of the voices sneered, a high, reedy tenor. "You become soft. This baby, this distraction, it is an insult to the family. And for that, the family must be purged. Touch her, and I will end your lineage." Val's voice was dangerously calm, low and smooth as a glacier, a stark contrast to the urgency of the moment. "I promise you a grave so deep your bones will never see the light. A father's threat. How domestic. We will see how much protection your threat offers when the child is used to bait the trap. Then you will crawl to us, begging for your little principessa." Ella didn't hesitate. She knew in that instant that they were talking about Valentina. They were planning to take the child. The Mafia was not a world of polite negotiations. It was a world of brutal leverage. She raced back to the nursery, adrenaline surging through her veins, overriding all fear. She grabbed a heavy cashmere blanket, swaddled Valentina tightly in it, and looked frantically around the room. The nursery had 2 doors, the main one leading into the hall, and a smaller, discreet one that led to the private staircase Val used. She heard a loud crash from the direction of the library, a table overturned, a struggle. It was now or never. Tucking Valentina securely against her chest, she threw open the hidden door and scrambled down the narrow, spiraling staircase. It led into a large walk-in humidor, which in turn opened onto the meticulously maintained back gardens. The night air hit her face, cold and shocking. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she had to get out. The garden walls were too high. She needed a hiding place, a distraction. She ran toward the rear gate, a massive iron structure, knowing she'd never open it alone. That's when she saw it, a small, unused gardener's shed, half hidden beneath a sprawling wisteria vine. She ducked inside, pulling the heavy, rusted door shut, plunging them into suffocating darkness and the smell of dry earth and stored chemicals. She held Valentina tightly, her heart thundering. The baby, miraculously, hadn't cried yet, only whimpered once. Ella pressed her face into the blanket covering the child's head, whispering frantic, soothing reassurances. Then, she heard the boots, heavy, measured footsteps on the gravel path, getting closer. 2 men, their voices muffled but clearly searching. "Check the gardens." He wouldn't let her leave the grounds. He cares for the child too much. "He's stalling. He thinks we're only after him. He doesn't know we want the key to his soul." The footsteps stopped right outside the shed door. Ella stopped breathing. She felt the cold sweat on her palms, the desperate, crushing fear of being discovered. They will take her. They will hurt her. Suddenly, an image flashed into her mind. The maître d'armes' sneering face, the cold marble, the crushing humiliation. She had been abandoned then, too. She had collapsed. But now, she wasn't alone. She was protecting this little life, this innocent treasure who belonged to the most dangerous man in the city. Her compassion, the quality that had made her a victim in the outside world, now made her a lioness in this cage. She held Valentina closer, ready to scream, to fight, to make any noise to draw the danger away from the child. She was ready to sacrifice herself for the little girl who had given her a reason to live again. The door handle rattled. a slow, agonizing squeak as the rusty latch was released. Before the door could even swing open, a sound ripped through the stillness of the night. It was a roar, a primal, animalistic scream of rage and pure violence, instantly followed by the rapid, rhythmic bursts of an automatic weapon. Not just a pistol, but something heavy, industrial, and terrifyingly efficient. The men outside the shed instantly scrambled, abandoning their search. "It's him! He's broken free! Get back to the house!" The chaos was instantaneous. More gunfire, screams, the sound of glass shattering in the distance, and cutting through it all, Val's voice, not raised, but terrifyingly clear and filled with absolute, murderous intent. "You touch my daughter, and you will learn what it means to beg for oblivion." The danger had moved away from the shed, retreating toward the house. Ella waited, shaking uncontrollably, for what felt like an hour, listening to the brutal, chaotic ballet of violence. She didn't move until the gunfire had faded into silence, and the only sounds left were the chirping of crickets and the frantic, shallow breathing of her own exhaustion. Finally, the shed door was yanked open, not with a rattle, but with a silent, powerful force. Standing there, silhouetted against the pale light of the security lamps, was Val. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving, his immaculate suit splattered with dark, wet stains. A streak of crimson ran across his cheek, and the knuckles of his right hand were skinned and bruised. He looked like the incarnation of the violence that had just swept through the estate. He didn't look at Ella. His eyes went instantly to Valentina, his chest deflating only when he saw the small, bundled shape safe in her arms. "They were going to take her," Ella whispered, her voice tight with terror and exhaustion. "I heard them. They were going to use her to bait you." Val walked in and closed the door. He didn't turn on the light. The faint illumination from the open door was enough to show the raw, terrifying grief and relief battling on his face. He didn't speak. He just reached out and gently took Valentina from her arms. He held the child close, burying his face in the soft blanket, his large frame shaking with silent, contained emotion. Then he looked back at Ella, his eyes blazing with a frightening intensity. "You knew the danger," he ground out, the words raw, "and you ran to protect her. You did not abandon her." "I made a promise," Ella stated simply. "I don't break my promises." He reached out a hand, not to her arm, but to her face. His thumb, still faintly slick with the dark stains of combat, gently wiped away a tear that had frozen on her cheek. The touch was shocking, intimate, possessive, and electric. "They are gone," he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous, low possessiveness. "They will not return, not for a long time. They underestimated me, and they underestimated you." He took a step closer, leaving no space between them, the tiny Valentina, now a precious shield between their bodies. "You saved her life, Alara," he said, his eyes now fixed solely on hers, burning away the last remnants of their employer-employee relationship. "You proved your loyalty when a lesser woman would have fled and abandoned the child to save herself. You could have been killed." "I know," she whispered, her fear momentarily forgotten in the face of his terrifying intensity. "This changes everything," Val murmured, his head slowly descending. "I brought you in to be her shield. Now, you are part of the very core I must protect. You belong to me, not just by contract, but by blood, by the sacrifice you were ready to make." His lips brushed against hers, a whisper of a kiss, fierce and possessive, instantly deepening with the heat of his dangerous emotion. It was not a gentle, romantic kiss. It was a hungry claim, a sealing of a terrifying, forbidden bond, forged in violence and the primal instinct to protect. He pulled back, his eyes dark with a terrifying tenderness. He held Valentina securely, but his free hand reached out and gripped Ella's jaw, holding her face up to the dim light. "From this moment no one touches you," Val whispered, his voice a low, immutable vow that echoed the possessive claim he had made in the restaurant. "You are mine. They will have to kill me before they even look at you sideways." The kiss in the gardener's shed was the point of no return. It was a baptism by fire and blood, a silent vow exchanged over the fragile life of a child. When Val finally pulled away, his breathing still ragged, His eyes were no longer those of a detached employer, but of a possessive, territorial male who had just claimed what was his. He didn't speak another word about the attack. He simply carried Valentina, holding her now with a fierce protectiveness that bordered on pain, and walked back toward the house. Ella followed him, stumbling slightly, her mind reeling from the immediate terror of the attack and the slow-burning shock of his kiss. The memory of his lips on hers, tasting faintly of metal and expensive scotch, was a dangerous, intoxicating poison in her veins. The cleanup was swift and brutal. By morning, the library was pristine, the blood and shattered glass vanished, as if the violence had been a bad dream. The only physical evidence was the new, heavily armed detail of men who patrolled the grounds, moving with the quiet, efficient menace of predators. The incident was never mentioned again. In the Rossi household, secrets weren't just kept, they were erased. But everything had changed. Vale was no longer content to observe from the doorway. He began to seek her out, not just for updates on Valentina, but for companionship, or rather, a quiet, demanding proximity. He would bring his work, dossiers, and financial ledgers that seemed to hum with silent, immense power to the nursery. He would sit in a dark leather armchair, Valentina sleeping peacefully in her crib, and simply exist in the room with Ella. One afternoon, Ella was reading Alice in Wonderland aloud to the sleeping baby, practicing the inflections and voices to pass the time. Val was working, his brow furrowed in concentration. She assumed he wasn't listening, focused as he was on the immense world of his criminal empire. "The best way to explain it is to do it," Vale suddenly quoted, his head not even lifting from the papers. Ella froze, the book held mid-air. "Pardon me? That's the Mad Hatter," he murmured, flipping a page in a thick file. "You skip the parts of the trial. They are necessary for context, Alara." The shock was profound. This man, this ruthless sovereign of the underworld, was listening to her read children's literature, correcting her plot omissions. "I didn't think you were paying attention," she whispered. He finally lifted his gaze, his dark eyes sharp and unsettling. "I pay attention to everything in my house, especially what comforts my daughter. And you have a soothing voice. It is a necessary asset." His praise, veiled in pragmatic, cold language, felt dangerously close to intimacy. They had established a strange equilibrium. She was his daughter's caretaker, the only person he allowed close to his greatest vulnerability, and he was her protector, the unwavering wall between her and the poverty she had escaped. The attraction, forbidden and terrifying, began to build, a slow, deep pressure in the silences between them. She started seeing the man beneath the marble mask. He stayed up all night when Valentina had a fever, pacing the hall until she called him in, insisting he hold his own daughter. She saw the raw, almost pathetic devotion he had for the child. She saw his exhaustion, the relentless strain of maintaining an empire built on fear. And in those vulnerable moments, he saw her, not as the abandoned woman from the restaurant, but as the quiet, fiercely protective soul who was keeping his heart alive. Their talks grew more personal, though never about them. She would share small, carefully curated details about her life, the sacrifices of her grandmother, the joy she took in her tiny garden plot before she came here, the pain of being judged solely on her lack of money. He listened with an unnerving stillness. In return, he offered only fragments of his own past. "My life was built on expectation, Alara, not love. There is a difference. One is a cage, the other is a dangerous weapon." "Which one is Valentina?" she dared to ask one afternoon. He looked at the baby, a deep, unreadable expression shadowing his face. "She is the only thing that makes the cage worthwhile." This strange, tense, isolated intimacy was their bubble, a safe space within the dangerous walls of the estate. But in the world of Valentino Rossi, bubbles were made to be burst. The new threat didn't arrive with bullets or a midnight raid. It arrived in a limo, clad in $500,000 of haute couture, and armed with a cold, glittering smile. Valentino called Ella down to the receiving parlor one morning, instructing her to bring Valentina. "You will be introduced. You will be polite. You will answer questions concerning only the child's health, nothing more." His tone was clipped, formal, a clear warning. Ella, wearing one of the modest but comfortable dresses Val had insisted his house manager purchase for her, entered the parlor. The room was already occupied by a vision of ice and diamond-sharp elegance. Lady Serafina Valeriusa. She was Val's fiancée, a relationship Ella knew of only through whispered rumors among the household staff, and one Val had never addressed. Serafina was tall, raven-haired, and possessed a glacial beauty that was as intimidating as Val's own power. She was the daughter of the head of one of the oldest, most powerful banking families in Italy, a strategic alliance designed to cement Val's legitimate business fronts and consolidate his power. She was his equal in stature, and by all appearances, his partner in ruthless ambition. Serafina was seated elegantly on a silk-upholstered chaise, sipping tea. She barely registered Ella's entrance, her eyes going straight to the baby in Ella's arms. "Valentino, darling." Serafina's voice was like polished metal, smooth, cold, and utterly inflexible. "You've kept your little secret well. She is a necessary distraction, I suppose, a testament to your vigor if nothing else." She spoke of Valentina as if she were a new car or a piece of art, something to be owned and displayed, not a beloved child. She then finally turned her attention to Ella, her gaze raking over her with clinical, cruel precision, lingering dismissively on the small, almost imperceptible fray on Ella's cuff. "And you must be the help," Serafina stated, her tone dripping with distaste. "Such a common face. Valentina, this is the woman who changes your diapers. Remember that when she tries to teach you manners." The deliberate humiliation was instant and sharp, like 1,000 tiny needles. It was the same condescension she had faced from the maître d'armes, from Bartholomew, but amplified by Serafina's immense wealth and position. Ella felt Val shift beside her, a subtle tightening of his jaw, a tension that warned her of his mounting anger. But she remembered his instructions: be polite, answer only about the child. "Lady Serafina," Ella said, managing to keep her voice level, "my name is Alara Hale. I am Miss Valentina's full-time governess and nurse. She is currently thriving. Her fever has been absent for 4 days, and she is meeting all her developmental milestones." Serafina laughed, a brittle, high-pitched sound that held no humor. "A governess? In that dress? How quaint. Tell me, Alara, where is your certification? What schooling allowed you this position? Or did Valentino simply find you useful after one of his less reputable dealings?" The attack was a deliberate probe, aimed at exposing Ella's poverty and Val's illicit methods. It was a clear warning: "I know your secret, peasant." Before Ella could formulate a reply, Val stepped forward, his body moving subtly to block Serafina's direct line of sight to Ella. "Serafina." Val's voice was calm, but dangerously low, a distinct warning in his tone. "Alara's qualifications are sufficient, and she has proven her loyalty under duress. Her history is not your concern. Your concern is the alliance between our houses, which remains strong." "Of course, darling," Serafina purred, not backing down. "But a man of your stature cannot have a peasant shadow hanging over his heir. She is an insult to the prestige of the Rossi name. And soon, I will be the Donna of this house, the mistress, the child's stepmother. We will require a governess who reflects our station. A Frenchwoman, perhaps, a degree from Oxford, not a rescued stray from the gutters." The word stepmother was the true dagger, aimed not at Ella's pride, but at Val's autonomy over his child. Serafina saw Valentina not as a person, but as the heir to the empire, a position she fully intended to control. Ella felt a deep, instinctive terror. If Serafina replaced her, she would be back on the street, her grandmother unprotected, and Valentina would be in the hands of a woman who viewed her as a political tool. The desperation that had driven her to accept Val's initial offer surged back tenfold. "Serafina," Val said, his voice now dangerously smooth, "you are here to discuss the merger of our interests, not the details of my household staff. Alara is precisely where I require her to be. Now, let us adjourn to the dining room. I believe my solicitor is waiting." He offered Serafina his arm, giving her a look that demanded compliance. As he passed Alara, his eyes met hers for a fleeting, intense second. In the depth of his dark gaze, she saw a clear, silent instruction: "Be patient, trust me." But later that night, after Val had retired to his office, The battle continued. Ella was alone in the nursery, checking on Valentina, when Serafina's personal maid, a woman with a sour, knowing face, appeared in the doorway. "Lady Serafina would like a word with you, governess," the maid hissed, emphasizing the title with a sneer. In the East Wing parlor, now. Ella followed, her heart heavy with dread. The East Wing parlor was cold and formal. Serafina was waiting, her elegance somehow even more menacing in the silent, ornate room. "Look at you," Serafina said, rising from her seat, walking slowly toward Ella, her expensive, precise heels clicking on the marble. "So pale, so eager to please. You think you've caught his eye, don't you? Because you managed to stop the little darling from choking on her formula." Ella stood her ground. "I am here for Valentina, Lady Serafina. Nothing more." "Liar," Serafina spat the word, her veneer of politeness finally cracking to reveal the sharp, cruel hatred beneath. "I saw the way he looked at you, the way he guarded you. Valentino is a man of alliances, Elara. He is building an empire. He needs a wife who can stand beside him, not a peasant he can hide in the nursery like a shameful trinket." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, chilling whisper. "I know who you are. The woman who was humiliated and abandoned at the Pantheon because she couldn't afford $45 of wine. I had Bartholomew tracked down. He told me everything. You are dirt, and do you know what happens to dirt in this organization? It gets swept away." Serafina didn't just insult her, she demonstrated her power, the chilling reach of her resources. She had dug up Ella's darkest humiliation and was using it as a weapon. "Leave the estate, Elara," Serafina continued, her voice gaining strength. "Tomorrow morning, before I have the opportunity to prove to Valentino that you are a financial liability and a health risk to his daughter, I will replace you with someone who sees the true value of their position, which is silence and distance." Ella felt the old, agonizing pressure of fear, the instinct to surrender. "She's right, I'm dirt, I don't belong here." But then she thought of Valentina, the baby's tiny hand curling around her finger, the trust in her small, pale face. She thought of Val, the broken-down warrior in the shed, leaning on her strength. "I have a contract with Val," Ella said, her voice trembling slightly, but holding firm, "and I have a bond with his daughter. You can threaten me all you want, Lady Serafina, but I will not abandon her, and I will not break my promise." Serafina's eyes narrowed into slivers of cold malice. "Very well, then you have chosen your fate, you will regret this obstinance." The next week was a slow, psychological torture. Ella found herself subjected to petty, calculated attacks. Valentina's specialized formula was replaced with cheap, generic powder, causing the baby's chronic cough to flare up. Ella caught the night nurse, Serafina's new hire, trying to give Valentina an unauthorized dose of sedative to keep her quiet. The medical reports Ella diligently kept were frequently found with pages torn out. Serafina was systematically manufacturing evidence that Ella was incompetent, negligent, and dangerous to the child. She was trying to force Val's hand, using his greatest fear, Valentina's vulnerability, as her leverage. The tension between Val and Ella intensified. He noticed the changes. He saw the baby's distress, the missing pages, the new night nurse's shifty eyes, but he was deeply entrenched in his political maneuvering with Serafina's family, an alliance he needed to protect his business from rival families who were sensing weakness after the failed assassination attempt. One evening, Val found Ella in the nursery, huddled over Valentina's crib, tears streaming down her face. The baby had a terrible cough and was struggling to breathe. "What is happening?" Val demanded, his calm facade finally shattered, his voice laced with panic. "I gave clear instructions on her care. Why is she worsening?" "It's the formula," Ella choked out, desperately trying to steady her voice. "It was changed. The night nurse claims it was a stock error, but the label was clearly tampered with. And I caught her trying to give Valentina a sedative tonight. She's working for Serafina, Val. She's trying to sabotage me. She's trying to make me look like I'm hurting Valentina." Val's face went white with a terrifying mixture of cold fury and fear. He looked from the sick child to Ella's desperate, tear-streaked face. For a moment she thought he might doubt her. She thought the weight of Serafina's political value might be too much for him to discard. Then, he reached out, not to comfort her, but to seize the tampered canister of formula. He held it in his hand, his knuckles white, the cheap metal bending under his pressure. "The night nurse is dismissed," he stated, his voice a low, cold vibration of command. "Effective immediately. She will not step foot on these grounds again." He then turned to Ella, his eyes burning with a desperate, naked emotion she had only seen once before, in the shed. "Why didn't you come to me sooner, Alara? Why did you suffer in silence?" "I know what is at stake," Ella whispered, wiping her eyes. "I know this alliance with Serafina is vital to your safety, to your empire. I didn't want to be the reason you risked it. I thought I could handle her petty cruelty, but she's going after Valentina." Her voice broke on a sob. "She is a threat to the child, Val. You have to see that." He put the formula down. He didn't answer her. Instead, he walked over to the crib, gently stroking Valentina's forehead, his entire massive body trembling with controlled rage. He saw the cold calculation of Serafina's cruelty, the horrifying line she had crossed. He turned back to Ella. He reached out and pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his suit, holding her tightly against the heat and power of his body. It was an embrace born not of passion, but of raw, protective instinct, a shelter from the storm he had created. "She will not harm you. She will not harm my daughter," Val vowed into her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "I will not let her. I will burn this city down before I let that woman touch a single hair on either of your heads." The next day, the political facade of the Rossi house crumbled. Val did not dismiss Serafina. He did something far more devastating. That afternoon, he called an emergency meeting. Serafina and her father, the powerful banker, were seated in the parlor, surrounded by Val's most trusted capos and legal counsel. Ella was also present, standing silently in a corner, holding a sleeping Valentina. Val stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid, his power a palpable force in the room. "The alliance between the Rossi and Valerius families is hereby dissolved," Val announced, his voice carrying the weight of a final, irrevocable judgment. Serafina gasped, her perfect composure finally shattering. "Valentino! You can't! The contracts, the assets, I can," Val interrupted, his voice like cold steel. "The contract contains a morality clause. Any action taken by a party that endangers the immediate family of the other party constitutes grounds for immediate dissolution." He looked directly at Serafina, his eyes filled with a lethal coldness. "Lady Serafina, you conspired to harm my daughter, Valentina Rossi, by replacing her specialized medical formula with a substance that caused respiratory distress, and by attempting to administer an unauthorized sedative. My governess, Alara Hale, has documented proof, and the subsequent analysis of the substance will confirm my findings." Serafina's face was a mask of furious, terrified denial. "Lies, the peasant girl is framing me. She is a liar, and a gold digger." Vale ignored her, his eyes fixed on her powerful father. "Your daughter crossed a line, Senator. She attempted to harm my heir. That is an act of war. The alliance is broken. Your interests in this city are now my target. I suggest you remove your assets, and your daughter, before I decide to handle this in a manner that is less civil." Senator Valerius, pale and trembling, knew Vale was not bluffing. To harm the heir of a crime boss was an unforgivable offense. The political loss was immense, but the threat to their very lives was greater. He stood up, avoiding eye contact with his daughter, a gesture of abandonment that mirrored Ella's own. "We will comply," the senator whispered, his face etched with defeat. "Serafina, we leave, now." Serafina stared at Val, her eyes burning with hatred, but she saw the cold, unyielding power radiating from him, the men behind him, and the absolute certainty of her fate if she remained. She turned her malice on Ella, who still stood silently holding Valentina. "You win this round, peasant," Serafina hissed, "but he will tire of your common face. He will send you back to your pathetic life, and when he does, I will be waiting." Vale stepped away from the fireplace, crossing the distance to Serafina in 3 swift, menacing strides. He grabbed her arm, not violently, but with a sudden crushing grip that forced her attention entirely on him. "You will never speak to her again," Vale stated, his voice a low, terrifying growl. You will never look at her again. You will forget her name, her face, and her existence. You will forget Valentina's existence. I have eyes in every corner of this city, Serafina. If I ever hear a single whisper of a threat directed at Alara Hale, your life will cease to be an issue for your father to resolve. He released her arm, and Serafina, utterly defeated and terrified, was escorted from the house by her humiliated father. The house was finally quiet, the threat gone, the air cleansed of the poison. Vale dismissed his men and the solicitor, leaving only Ella, Valentina and himself in the opulent parlor. The room felt immense, empty, and charged with the silence of the storm that had just passed. Ella looked at him, her heart overflowing with an overwhelming gratitude that eclipsed the fear. He had chosen her. He had chosen Valentina. He had sacrificed a vital political alliance, risking his empire, to protect them. You sacrificed so much, Ella whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Val walked slowly toward her. He gently took the sleeping Valentina from her arms, carrying the child over to the sofa and placing her carefully amidst the plush pillows. He then turned back to Ella. He took her face in his hands, his touch surprisingly tender, yet fiercely possessive. I didn't sacrifice anything, Alara, Val stated, his dark eyes intense, burning with an emotion that was no longer just gratitude, but a terrifying, possessive kind of love. I eliminated a threat to my family. You and Valentina. You saved my daughter's life twice. You showed me a loyalty I could never buy, and a strength I failed to recognize in myself. You did not run. You fought a woman who threatened your entire future, and you stood your ground. He lowered his head, his lips meeting hers. This time, the kiss was not a desperate claim in the shadows. It was slow, deliberate, a deep exploration that stripped away the remnants of their professional distance. It was the kiss of a man accepting a vulnerability he had fought his entire life to deny. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. His breath was warm, his heart hammering against his ribs. You are not just the governess, Alara, he whispered, his voice husky, the admission costing him everything. You are the center of this house, the reason the walls stand. The woman who saw my daughter, and then saw me. He drew back fully, looking down at her, his expression resolute. He reached out and gently brushed a stray tear from her cheek, a tear that was now of relief, and a terrifying dawning hope. From this moment, Vale stated, his voice low, commanding and absolute, confirming the terrifying beautiful reversal of her fate. No one touches you. You're mine, and I will burn the world to the ground to keep what is mine safe.